Thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Brandy Mapes and I'm a research manager at the All of Us Data and Research Center. And today we're going to chat about resources that we make available for researchers who are working with the COPE survey series data. So to start off, let's just talk about some general information about this survey. In terms of the name, the official title is called the COVID-19 Participant Experience Survey. This is the title that participants see when they respond to it within their online portal. It's the survey name that we have on a file in our protocol. But for researchers that are using our tools and data within the Workbench, you'll see this abbreviated as COPE. So in our support materials in OMOP, you'll see COPE instead of the full name. Another thing is for timing. So the survey series initially launched in May 2020, and we released 6 versions over that time period from May 2020 through, sorry about that, from May 2020 through February 2021. Within those versions, we had a few content changes. So we'll talk about those today as well. To get started, let's just chat about our content. So I like to think of the content within the survey as categorized according to 3 main areas. You have COVID-19 specific items. Those are things such as symptoms, testing, social distancing guidelines, bereavement. Those items are pulled from sources such as the CDC Community Survey Question Bank for COVID-19. We're also pulling from places like the Henry Ford COVID-19 Social Distancing Survey. Another major element of our content is sourced from well-established and routinely used survey scales and screens. There we're pulling across domains such as anxiety, mental health, stress, substance use. We're using measures such as the Cohen's Perceived Stress Scale, the RAND Social Support Instrument, the Brief Resilient Coping Scale. I've highlighted that here because we're going to talk about some resources we make available specifically for researchers who are interested in scoring those scales. And then another category of our items are items that we source from other national cohort studies or population-based efforts. And for there, we have items that relate to food and housing insecurity, general health and well-being. We're pulling from places like the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, otherwise known as NHANES, as well as the Population Assessment of Tobacco and Health Study, otherwise known as PATH. And so when I was talking about those resources we make available for scoring scales, if you're in the Workbench and you go to our featured workspaces, click on Tutorial Workspaces, you'll see the How to Work with All of Us Survey Data workspace. Within there, we make a notebook available called How to Calculate Survey Scores. And that notebook includes information about scoring instructions, scoring references, so the original source manuscripts or information we've been able to gather from the literature, as well as some example of visualizations where we've calculated scores for an entire cohort. Within the COPE survey, there are 9 scores, 9 scoreable measures available for researchers. Another item we make available in terms of content is our Survey Explorer website. This is on the public Research All of Us website. There you can see English and Spanish versions of all of our survey materials. You can download those. You can also explore source information on an item-by-item basis. So you can see what an item looked like in the COPE survey compared to what it looked like in its original source. One other resource we have available in terms of content are for researchers who want to reuse the survey instruments we've released within the program. We house those in the REDCap shared library. This is a resource that's available to researchers whose institutions have a REDCap license on file. And in there, you can see as individual projects available for download each of our survey instruments in both English and Spanish. So let's talk just a little bit about versioning. On this screen, you can see a brief summary of changes that took place across each of the versions we've released. I've highlighted the May and the November versions because for me, I see these as the two major versions of this survey. The first took place in May, that's our initial release. From May to July, we had some minor changes, added a few items, made some minor wording changes, but otherwise the number of items, the number of sections pretty much stayed the same. Beginning in November, though, we made some pretty drastic changes to that survey. You can see we cut it down from over 100 items to less than 30, from 16 sections down to 6. The major change there is that we removed many of the sections that dealt with mental health and general well-being and replaced that with sections that were more specific to the state of the pandemic at that time. So for example, one of the major elements we added was COVID vaccine perception and hesitation items. In December, we actually had no changes. So the November and the December surveys are exact matches of each other. And then in February, we added some items about administration of the vaccine. So whether or not a participant received a vaccine, and if so, the type. Okay, so the other thing that's really important to know about our survey is how we transform that in the CDR. So like all of our survey materials, all of the items in the CDR, all survey items are stored in the observation table. A really quick tip for researchers who want to look at all the COPE items is to just search COPE in the Athena search bar. That will take you to the survey record. Within that record, you'll be able to see all topics and concepts associated with the survey. If you click on any of those topics or concepts, you'll be able to see all items. So let's look at what I mean by that. So on this screen, you can see that within the CDR, we have 14 topics stored. Within those 14 topics, I've listed out the number of items that would be associated with each one. So you're in Athena, you search COPE, you pull up that survey record, and then there are 14 topics available for you to browse. Within those topics, you'll see the full range of these items that are listed here. And another resource that we make available that I think is incredibly helpful for versioning and just understanding the types of changes that you can expect and how that impacts the data is our COPE survey notebook. So again, if you're using the How to Work with All of Us survey data workspace, you'll navigate over to the COPE survey notebook. Within that notebook, you can see some tips and tricks for calculating the frequency of distribution of response items. And you can also see the impact of versioning and how to work with versioning in your data set. So working with COPE survey versions, the key is that you're going to query based on the concept name, so COPE survey, as well as the COPE month. So for example, July 2020. On this screen, you can see a specific topic and all of the items that are captured in it. This is pulled directly from that notebook that I just mentioned. And you can see that we have NAs marked on certain months, and that's just to represent that those items didn't exist in those versions of the survey. So these first two items on the screen, those are bereavement items. They're pulled from the Nurses Health Study. They were added in July 2020. They just didn't exist in May or June. We have no data for those. As you're thinking about working with this data and concepts of interest to you, I think that this workspace, this notebook is really helpful just to browse, to get a sense of the amount of data we have according to each concept and its item and where they appear according to the survey version. So of course, like all of our surveys, you can work with the COPE survey data in our click and point tools. So in Cohort Builder, you have a couple of options for selecting a cohort based on the COPE survey. You can select a cohort based on participants who completed any version of the survey. So we have around 62,000 participants, unique participants who completed at least one version. You can create your cohort based on that. You can also decide that, I'm only interested in specific topics. So you could create a cohort based on a topic of interest, and that's another option that I've listed here. Once you create your cohort, you can navigate over to the Dataset Builder. You can always select prepackaged concepts. You can pull in items across the entire survey item by just clicking all surveys. Or you can also pull in specific COPE concepts of interest, just using this little plus button over in the Select Concept Sets section of the site. When you're using this, I think having Athena pulled up on another screen, another tab is really important. That way you could just browse all of the concepts that are available to you, looking at what those items are as a way to specify and think about the specific concepts you want to pull into your data set. So some other considerations for analyzing the COPE survey series. One thing is that concepts that are related to COVID-19 testing and diagnosis are not in the current registered tier data set. This applies to concepts both that would be captured in the COPE survey as well as concepts that can be derived from the EHR. They're not in there due to privacy protection. Another really interesting thing to keep in mind is that COPE concept date fields are not date shifted. This is unique. All other date fields in the registered tier are date shifted according to our standard privacy protection rules. And again, in the current CDR, what we have available is the May, June, and July COPE survey versions. In our next refresh of the registered tier data, which we anticipate to take place later this year, we'll be adding data from the November and December versions, as well as refreshing, adding additional data from those two. The February version would be available and a refresh after that next one. And then this is really just a tip for all of our survey concepts. But again, those concepts are stored in the OMOP observation table, and they are represented in long format. So think one row equals one item plus one answer per participant. That's important to know because many of our survey items are formatted as select all that apply types of questions. So a participant could select more than one response per item. So let's say, for example, a participant selected 5 responses to an item. That is going to be represented in the data as 5 rows. So that would be 5 responses, 5 rows for that participant in that item. And just a general note, we have general resources available for our entire survey library over in the Workbench. So if you're in the Workbench and you navigate over to our User Support Hub, click on Documentation, you can see information about privacy protection generalizations that apply to the survey materials. You can see resources, links to materials we think are of interest or important as you get ready to analyze that data, as well as code books. So you can see some abridged version of the information that's available into Athena based on a survey. And another opportunity I did want to mention today is that we are very fortunate to have received a gift from Intel that we want to apply to Google Cloud Platform credit cost. This would be computational cost for any researcher that is doing a COVID-19 project during this calendar year, so 2021. If you're doing a project on COVID-19, if you're using the COPE survey data, we want to hear from you. We want to help you with those costs. You can let us know by navigating over to the Contact Us tab in the Workbench. That would pull up our general help desk form, and you would just click on I have a workspace related to COVID-19 research and let us know so that we can apply these credits to cover your work. And that's actually all I have in terms of a formal presentation. And I thought now we can just open it up for some general questions or comments.